Have you ever woken up and felt something was wrong, even when there was nothing visible to justify it? Like the air was heavier, the silence deeper, and the movements around you slower? That's exactly how she felt that morning. Until the day before, her Shih Tzu was pure life. He'd wake up early, jump on the bed with almost childlike enthusiasm, wag his tail so hard it seemed like he was going to take flight, and, in addition, let out those short little barks as if to say, "Come on, it's time to start the day." But that morning, none of that happened. There was no running around the house, no sound of paws hitting the floor, no pleading look for affection. He was there, yes, but still, sitting in a corner of the room, watching her with an intensity she'd never seen before. His gaze wasn't that of a bored or sleepy dog. It was fixed, deep, filled with something she couldn't name, almost human, and that disconcerted her. At first, she tried to play, calling his name, clapping her, hands, even pretending to grab a toy, but he didn't react. He simply followed her with his eyes, as if studying every movement. She stood up, and unlike other days, he didn't run to the kitchen waiting for breakfast. Instead, he rose slowly and followed her with controlled, almost silent steps, as if he were a living shadow. With her every move, he followed her. There was no anxiety, no agitation, just a constant, unwavering presence. The strangest thing was that at the same time she felt comforted by having him so close, she also began to feel a slight shiver on the back of her neck. It was as if he knew something she didn't, and deep down, a voice inside her told her that this day wouldn't be like any other. If she had stopped to reflect at that moment, she might have realized she was about to experience one of the most defining moments of her life. But like most of us, she never imagined that a simple change in her dog's behavior could be the harbinger of something so big. All she knew at that moment was that her Shih Tzu was different, and that somehow this difference made her uneasy. The house always had its own soundtrack. The sounds were subtle but constant. The jingle of his collar as he moved, the quick rhythmic patter of his paws on the floor, the soft canine purr he made when he curled up to sleep, and even the playful grumble when he wanted attention. It was as if that set of sounds were the heartbeat of the home, but that morning, everything was different. There were no sounds. There was no background music of life and movement. There was only silence. She walked around the kitchen making coffee, and he was there, but not as usual. There was no usual shuffling of a pot around the house, no excited rushing to see what she was doing. He simply stayed close, following her every step, but almost imperceptibly, as if trying to go unnoticed. The silence was so absolute that she began to notice sounds she normally didn't. The low hum of the refrigerator, the distant creak of wooden furniture, even the soft sound of her own breathing. Every now and then, she'd glance over her shoulder and see him standing there, his ears slightly flat, staring at her. There was no fear in his expression, but there was a seriousness that clashed with his playful personality. It was as if he'd switched off his happy dog mode and switched on a silent watchman mode. This left her confused and somehow a little uneasy. On any other day, if she didn't interact with him, he'd invent some mischief, pull a cloth, steal a sock, or tap on the door to get attention. But today there was none of that. It wasn't boredom, it wasn't discouragement, it was intention. He seemed to be on a mission, and that mission was her. As she prepared the coffee, she tried to talk to him. She called his name, made that excited sound that always made him tilt his head, but the response was just the same silent, fixed stare. It was as if he were saying, "This is, no time to play. I'm here for another reason." With each passing minute, she felt that the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with meanings she couldn't yet grasp. And deep down, something told her that when she did, she wouldn't be the same. His gaze had always been one of the things that enchanted her most. It was a sweet, curious look, almost always accompanied by an enthusiastically wagging tail. But now, there was something new and unsettling about that pair of eyes. They were different. They hadn't completely lost their sparkle, but they were deeper, more attentive, as if searching for answers to a silent question. It wasn't a distracted look, nor the typical one of a dog waiting for a treat. It was a searching look. As she moved through the house, she felt his presence like a constant beam of light trained on her. Whether she was washing a cup or searching for something on the shelf, he never looked away. When she turned to look back at him, there was no reaction, no tilt of the head, no rapid blink. He simply maintained eye contact, steady and unbreakable. Every time their eyes met, she felt as if he were trying to pierce her surface, read her thoughts, understand her emotions. And the strangest thing was that this behavior had nothing to do with fear or insecurity. On the contrary, there was trust in his gaze, but also a quiet urgency. She tried to break the mood, picking up a toy, shaking it in the air, trying to cheer him up. Nothing. He didn't move away for even a second. The toy fell to the floor, and he didn't even look. It seemed like everything around him had lost its significance, and the only thing that truly mattered was her. At times, that gaze made her feel physically uncomfortable, as if she were being watched by someone who knew a secret about her that even she herself didn't know. The sensation was strange, but also slightly comforting, as if he were saying, "I know, and I'm here." She couldn't explain it, but every second of that gaze heightened her curiosity and, at the same time, her nervousness. Deep down, she began to wonder if this wasn't just canine behavior. Maybe there was something much deeper going on. That night, she realized the strangeness wasn't just daytime. There was also something different about the way he slept, or rather, the way he didn't sleep. Normally, the ritual was always the same. After dinner, he'd stretch, roll around a bit, and settle into the couch or bed, letting out a sigh of pure comfort. But that night, none of that happened. When she went upstairs, he didn't linger as usual. He followed closely behind, his steps controlled, as if he were escorting a frail patient. And instead of finding his favorite spot to lie down, he went straight to the foot of her bed. He didn't ask to be let in, nor did he lie down far away. He simply positioned himself there, like a guard, keeping his eyes fixed on her every move. The most disturbing thing was that even when she appeared to be dozing, all she had to do was move her legs slightly for him to lift his head and watch her again. It wasn't the lazy awakening of a sleepy dog. It was quick, alert, as if waiting for a signal. In the early morning, she woke to drink water and found his eyes glowing in the darkness, reflecting the little light that came through the window. There was no fear, but there was alertness. He wasn't resting. He was on alert. She lay down again and tried to ignore the feeling of being watched, but she couldn't. Every time she opened her eyes, he was there, motionless, fixed, as if her every breath mattered. At one point, she even thought it was overreacting, but instinct told her otherwise. He wasn't just spending the night beside her, he was making sure nothing happened. And the more she thought about it, the harder it was to go back to sleep. The next morning, she thought that perhaps a good meal would bring her Shih Tzu back to his usual behavior. After all, he had always loved breakfast, especially when it involved his favorite treat, those crunchy biscuits he recognized by the sound of the package being opened. And he came running with his tail wagging as if it were the greatest joy in the world. But this time, there was no running, no jumping up and down in excitement. He just watched her as she opened the cupboard and grabbed the package. Still, she thought, he's here. He'll be excited. But when the scent of the treat filled the air, he slowly approached, sniffed, and backed away. That confused her. She could tell when he was nauseous or unwell, but that wasn't the case. His body was erect, alert, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't seem ill, just disinterested. But it wasn't a common disinterest. It seemed like a conscious choice. It was as if he were saying, "Now is not the time to eat. It's time to attend to something else." She persisted. She tried to offer it to him, brought the treat to his nose, and made an encouraging voice. Nothing. He just looked at her, then at the treat, and then back at her as before, with that almost human seriousness. The moment was brief, but the impact was profound. Never, in all their years together, had he refused that snack without being sick. It made her realize a pattern was forming. The silence, the staring, the nighttime vigil, and now, the refusal of her favorite food. It was as if everything was part of a single behavior that had a purpose. She just couldn't put her finger on it. Deep down, she began to feel like his. Every gesture was a warning, and for the first time, she felt a slight fear of what she might discover if she paid too much attention. She was already used to having her Shih Tzu around. He was always a faithful companion, but also independent. There were times when he would cling to her, begging for affection, and other times when he would retreat to watch the street through the window or lie down on his bed, enjoying his own space. But in the last few days, something had changed. He wasn't just companionship anymore. He was surveillance. It all started subtly, but now it was impossible not to notice. He simply wouldn't leave her alone, not even for a minute. If she went to the kitchen, he followed, walking a step or two behind, his gaze fixed on her movements. When she crossed the hallway, he quickened his pace and arrived first, stopping exactly where she was going, as if he'd foreseen her destination before she even decided. Even the bathroom, a space he never insisted on, entering, had now become a point of observation. He would stand in the doorway, watching, as if ensuring nothing happened. There was part of an important job. The most intriguing thing is that this closeness wasn't accompanied by demands. He didn't jump, bark, or whine. It wasn't like a dog begging for attention. It was a silent, calculated, almost strategic presence. He was simply there, always alert, always ready to react. There were times when she almost tripped over him because he stood so close that any sudden movement could have knocked them over. But even then, he didn't move away. If she stopped, he stopped. If she took a step, he took one too. There was no rush, but there was consistency. This constancy began to take hold. Throughout the day, she noticed that no matter if she was washing dishes, working on the computer, or simply changing rooms, he was there, maintaining the same distance, the same posture. It was as if he had taken on the role of bodyguard. And the more this happened, the more the feeling grew within her. This wasn't just affection. It was surveillance. It was care. Maybe even protection from something she couldn't see. Deep down, she began to feel like he knew something she didn't, and that until she found out, he wouldn't leave her side. This constant presence, which might be comforting to anyone else, was a mixture of relief and unease for her. It was good to know he was there, but it was also impossible to ignore the fact that there was a reason for his silent dedication, a reason that sooner or later would surface. If there was one thing she knew well about her Shih Tzu's behavior, it was his relationship with the sounds of the house and the street. He was always selective. He ignored the noise of the refrigerator, the clinking of cutlery, or the distant sound of a passing car. What really caught his attention were specific noises: the opening of a treat bag, the click of the collar before a walk, or the doorbell. Other than that, he was indifferent, maintaining that relaxed posture of someone who knows he's safe. But in recent weeks, that relationship has changed completely. Sounds that previously went unnoticed now provoked an immediate reaction in him. A car speeding down the street, a door slamming next door, even the slight creak of the wood flooring with the change in temperature. Everything was a reason for him to be on alert. The curious thing is that it wasn't a fright. There was no sudden jump or dash for safety. The contrary. Every reaction was calculated. He would hear the sound, slowly lift his head, his ears pricking up, and his eyes fixed in the exact direction the noise was coming from. Then he would stand up and, almost always, position himself between her and the source of the noise. Sometimes it was a simple movement. He would rise from his bed, take 2 steps, and then stand still, his body leaning slightly forward, as if ready to react. Other times, his posture was even more protective. He would stand in front of her, facing the sound, like a silent shield. This behavior wasn't limited to indoors. During a walk down the sidewalk, a creaking gate, or a distant metallic noise was enough to completely change his posture. His tail, normally raised and wagging, would now remain firm and still. His eyes were alert. He would slow down and position himself so that he was always between her and the possible source of the noise. She began to realize it wasn't just attention, it was active surveillance. He wasn't reacting with fear or curiosity, he was reacting with protection, as if every sound were a potential danger, and her job was to ensure nothing went unnoticed. What was most intriguing was that after each incident, he didn't immediately return to his relaxed state. He remained attentive for a few minutes, as if making sure everything was truly okay. And in some cases, he even double-checked the location of the sound, like an investigator revisiting the scene to make sure he hadn't missed anything. For her, this began to reinforce a notion that had already been growing. He was on duty. He wasn't just being a companion dog, he was acting as a protector, ready to act at a moment's notice. And if he felt this need, it was because he somehow sensed something was different, something she hadn't yet figured out. The night was calm. She had finished her day's chores and could finally settle into the sofa, a blanket draped over her legs and a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The soft light from the lamp cast a warm, cozy glow over the room, while the TV played some insignificant program, merely playing in the background. Beside her, her Shih Tzu rested peacefully at her feet, breathing slowly, as if about to fall asleep. Everything seemed normal, until he stood up. It wasn't a jump or a sudden movement, but a slow, controlled rise, as if he'd caught sight of something that demanded his immediate attention. She distractedly followed him with her gaze, expecting him to get a drink of water or move. But to her surprise, he walked to the center of the room and stopped, staring at the closed door. At first, she thought he was reacting to some sound, maybe a neighbor passing by in the hallway or a car parking on the street. But soon she realized there was no sound at all. The room was completely silent, too silent. He stood still, his body erect, his ears slightly tilted forward. He didn't bark, growl, or make any sound. He simply watched. And it wasn't a curious look, the kind dogs give when trying to understand something new. It was a serious, steady look that seemed to measure every second of what was happening on the other side of that door. She tried to break the tension by calling his name in the lightest voice possible. "Hey, what's up?" But he didn't move. He didn't look away. He didn't blink more than necessary. It was as if he hadn't even heard. Time, in that moment, seemed to flow differently. Each second of silence stretched, becoming almost palpable. She could hear her own heart beating rapidly, and a chill began to creep up the back of her neck. She looked at the door, trying to find something to explain her reaction. Nothing. No shadow, no sound, no change. After nearly 2 minutes, he finally relaxed his posture. Not all at once, but gradually. His ears returned to their normal position, his body lost its tension, and he took a deep breath as if completing some sort of risk assessment. Then he turned to her, and it was at that moment that something unsettled her even more. There was something in his gaze, a mix of, "Everything's fine, for now," and "Don't let your guard down." It wasn't a normal look, nor even a look of complete relief. It was as if he were saying the situation was under control, but not yet over. He came back to her and lay down again, but this time he didn't close his eyes immediately. He lay there, watching the room, as if waiting for the next signal. She tried to go back to watching TV, but knew she couldn't concentrate. That scene had left a strange mark on her mind, the feeling that something had happened that night, and only he had noticed. After that strange night in the living room, her Shih Tzu's behavior took on a new dimension. At first, she didn't pay much attention. It seemed like just a loving gesture. But as the days went by, she realized there was more to it. It was a pattern, a silent message he kept repeating. It all started on a quiet morning. She was sitting at the table, drinking coffee and reading something on her phone. He approached slowly, leaned against her leg, and lightly touched her arm with his front paw. It wasn't a scratch. It wasn't a brusque request. It was a gentle touch, almost respectful, but firm enough for her to feel and look at him. When she looked up, that gaze was there, deep, intent, fixed. There was no wagging tail, no doggy smile. He simply stared at her, motionless, as if waiting for a response. She smiled, petted him, and went back to what she was doing. But a few minutes later, the touch was repeated. Over the next few days, this began to happen more frequently. It might be while she was washing dishes. He'd come over, rest his paw on her arm, and watch. Or while she was reading on the couch, he'd approach, rest his paw, and wait for her to notice him. There was no barking, no attempt to jump on her lap, just that gesture, and the silence. It was as if he'd created his own code. A touch to say, pay, attention, a look to complete the message. And though she didn't know exactly what he meant, something inside her told her this was no ordinary request. It wasn't about food, a walk, or a game. It was about her. Over time, the touch began to happen at specific moments. When she seemed tired, when she sat for too long without moving, or when she seemed too distracted by something, he would approach, make the gesture, and remain there, firmly, until she returned the eye contact. On some occasions, the intensity of this gesture increased. He wouldn't just touch her with his paw, but he would also make a slight nudging motion with her arm, as if urging her to stop what she was doing and pay attention to him, or perhaps to herself. She began to notice that, immediately after that touch, he followed her more closely, watching her every step. It was as if he wanted to make sure she'd understood the message. But how can you understand something that wasn't said? This small gesture, which to anyone else might have seemed like just another display of affection, began to become a puzzle to her, and the more he repeated it, the more she became certain there was a deeper meaning behind it. That night began like any other. She went to bed a little later than usual, tired from the intense day, ready to shut her mind and rest. Her Shih Tzu, as always, accompanied her to her bedroom. But unlike usual, he didn't go straight to his favorite spot, a soft pillow at the foot of the bed, where he always slept curled up like a little ball of fur. This time he stood beside her, watching as she adjusted the pillow. His eyes didn't blink more than necessary, and there was something about his posture that made her feel a slight chill. He was completely erect, like a soldier on guard. She found it strange, but decided to ignore it. She turned off the lamp, lay down, and closed her eyes. Only a few minutes passed before she felt a gentle touch on her arm. She thought he was asking for affection, so she opened her eyes to give him a pat, but he didn't seem interested. He continued to stare at her, his body firm, his ears slightly forward. She closed her eyes again, trying to sleep, but again she felt the touch, this time with his nose. It was as if he were saying, "Don't sleep yet." This cycle repeated itself over and over. Whenever she began to drift off into a deeper sleep, she felt the touch again, accompanied by that insistent gaze. Around midnight, he began pacing around the room, not restlessly, but rather as if he were inspecting every corner. He would approach the door, sniff, look down the hallway, and then return to her. He would go to the window, watch for a few seconds, and then return. It was as if he were ensuring that no danger approached while she rested. This behavior continued throughout the night. There wasn't a single moment when he seemed to completely relax. Even when he lay down, he kept his eyes open, alert, as if ready to react to any signal. Around 4 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep soundly. She just lay there watching him. And in that silence, interrupted only by the distant sounds of the night, a certainty began to form within her. He wasn't just acting on instinct. There was something specific that kept him so vigilant, something she didn't know, but which he seemed to sense, and which, for some reason, he didn't want her to discover in her sleep. That was the night she understood, definitively, that his behavior was no coincidence. It was a warning, a silent alert that sooner or later would reveal its motive. The sun was already beginning to filter through the cracks in the curtains when she opened her eyes. There was no alarm clock ringing, no noise in the street to justify her sudden awakening. What woke her was that strange sensation of not having truly rested. It felt as if she had slept with one eye open, her mind alert the entire time. And in a way, that was exactly what had happened, because all night long she knew she was being watched. And it wasn't a contrived sensation. Turning her head, she saw her Shih Tzu in exactly the same place as before, lying beside the bed, but not relaxed. His head was raised, his eyes fixed on her, as if waiting for the right moment to act. He didn't move when she woke. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't run to the kitchen, as he always did in the mornings. He just kept his steady, almost investigative gaze, as if wanting to confirm she was okay, before allowing the day to begin. When she finally stood, he immediately positioned himself beside her, following her every step with the same almost military attention. There was no distraction. Even as she passed through the living room, where he would normally be cheered by the morning light streaming through the windows, he remained glued to her, attentive. But that morning, something about him was even sharper. His gaze was more serious, his movements more calculated. Every time she changed direction, he moved too, but never abruptly. It was as if he were on a mission that required absolute concentration. She tried to convince herself she was exaggerating, that maybe it was just her imagination. But deep down, she knew better. All the behaviors of the past few days, the silence, the staring, the nights awake, the refusal of her favorite treat, the touch on her arm, formed a pattern. And it wasn't just any pattern. It was as if all those puzzle pieces pointed to something she couldn't yet see. Every time I met his gaze, I felt butterflies in my stomach, as if I were receiving a wordless message. I know something, and you need to realize it too. It began to bother her. It wasn't just curiosity. It was as if her body itself was reacting to this silent message, heightening her attention, making her heart race. She couldn't explain where that certainty came from, but she could no longer ignore the feeling. Something inside her told her he wasn't just being protective or affectionate. He was trying to warn her, and even more disturbing, to warn her about something that directly affected her health, her safety, perhaps even her future. And in that instant, she decided, no matter what it was, she was going to find out. 2 days after that silent, tense morning, she had a doctor's appointment scheduled. It wasn't urgent, at least in his view. A routine checkup, the kind you schedule without rushing, just to keep up to date. She woke early, showered, got ready, and the whole time, she noticed that her Shih Tzu was more restless than usual. It wasn't anxiety about seeing her leave. It was as if he knew that day would carry a special weight. As she dressed, he followed her from room to room. When she picked up her purse, he positioned himself right in front of the door, staring at her as if to prevent her from leaving. When she opened it, he hesitated to step out of the way, as if to say, "Are you sure you need to go?" She smiled, gave him a quick pat, and left, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest that had been growing for the past few days. In the office, everything seemed normal. The doctor asked routine questions, checked previous test results, and ordered a few new ones just in case. One of them was taken right there. While waiting for the results, she fiddled with her phone, distracted but sensing something was about to happen. When the doctor returned, her tone changed. It wasn't alarmist, but it was serious. She explained that although she appeared to be well, the tests indicated a change that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't life-threatening, but serious enough to require immediate monitoring and lifestyle changes. As he listened, he felt his heart race, and almost instantly, a memory flooded his mind. The last few days with his Shih Tzu, the deep gazes, the sleepless nights, the refusal of his favorite snack, the insistent touch on his arm. Everything, absolutely everything, now seemed to make sense. The doctor, perhaps noticing her thoughtful expression, commented, "You know, there are studies that show that dogs can detect changes in the human body before we even notice. They pick up on odors, micro-expressions, subtle changes that go unnoticed by us." She was silent for a few seconds. Then, almost without thinking, she replied, "I think mine already knew." On the way home, the feeling was strange. She wasn't exactly scared by the diagnosis because now she had a plan to take care of her health, but she was deeply impressed by what she had realized. Her Shih Tzu had detected something before the doctors had even pointed it out. When she arrived, he was at the door, waiting. And when he saw her, he didn't jump for joy as he would on other days. He just approached slowly, nuzzled her leg, and stood still. She bent down, hugged him tightly, and in that moment, she understood. He wasn't just a companion, he was her silent guardian, someone who, without a word, had done everything he could to warn her that something wasn't right. After that appointment, nothing seemed the same. She returned home with a strange mixture of relief at knowing what she had and being able to treat it, and amazement at realizing her Shih Tzu had sensed it before any exam. The rest of the day was different. No matter what she was doing, she found herself looking at him, remembering every detail of the past few days, every gesture, every silence, every fixed gaze that now had a new meaning. In the days that followed, she began to pay attention like never before. A simple twitch of an ear, a lingering look, the way he approached or moved away, everything became her focus. It was as if she had learned a new language, the silent language of sign language. And this new language revealed things she hadn't previously known. She noticed that when she was more tired, he changed the way he lay, getting closer. When she was anxious, he seemed to follow her more closely, as if absorbing some of her tension. And when she was happy, he changed too, becoming lighter, more playful, as if feeding off her mood. It was impossible not to think about what the doctor had said about dogs detecting subtle changes in the human body. But for her, it went beyond scientific explanation. It wasn't just a heightened sense of smell or the perception of micro-expressions. It was something deeper, something that seemed to come from a place where science and emotion meet. This realization changed the way she related to him. She was no longer just the owner caring for his dog. Now she felt cared for as well. There was a constant, silent exchange that she learned to value. Over time, she began talking to others about it. She discovered stories of dogs who detected illnesses before diagnosis, who behaved strangely before their owner's medical crises, who acted protectively in times of danger. She realized she wasn't alone, and that what she experienced was part of a larger, though still little understood, phenomenon. But deep down, she knew that every story is unique, and hers had a special element. It wasn't just about prevention or instinct. It was about a love so intense that it manifested itself in unconditional protection, a care that transcended any barrier of language or species. She began to tell herself that if anyone ever doubted the bond between humans and dogs, she would tell her story. She would tell them about the Shih Tzu, who without a word was able to change the course of her life. Since that day, she never looked at her Shih Tzu the same way again. I'd already loved him deeply, but now I saw him with a different respect, as someone who wasn't just there to receive affection and companionship, but also to protect and care for, even if silently. Every small gesture became important. If he changed the way he walked, she paid attention. If he stared for longer, she tried to understand why. If he moved closer than usual, she observed. She learned that, often, the most important communication comes not through words, but through looks, behaviors, and silences. That experience showed him that the bond between humans and dogs goes far beyond walks and meals. There's a real, deep connection that unites hearts in an inexplicable way. It's as if they can sense what's going on inside us, not just physically, but emotionally as well. She understood that ignoring changes in a dog's behavior could mean missing precious signals. Signals that, as in her case, could reveal something important and even save a life. Since then, she's investigated every oddity, not with fear, but with gratitude, knowing she has someone by her side who will never give up on caring for her. And if I could summarize what I've learned, it would be simple. True love expresses itself in protection, and sometimes The most loyal guardian you'll ever have doesn't speak your language, but understands your heart better than anyone else. And if this story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who loves dogs, because they may have also experienced something similar without realizing it. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, because in the next video I'll share another impressive story that will forever change the way you view your four-legged best friend.